We'll do that, but I'll first turn it over to Senator Peters for some extra questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Mr. Krebs. As you know, you and I have spoken about the rise of domestic extremist violence in the country and how we need to be conscious of that rise. And in August, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security memos reportedly warned of threats by domestic extremists to election-related targets in the run-up to the 2020 election. Unfortunately and sadly, these warnings seem to have been well warranted. Since President Trump's false claims of widespread voter fraud, local election officials across the nation have faced harassment. Some of them have faced death threats against themselves and their families. In Michigan, our Secretary of State had protesters surround her home while she was decorating it with her young child to get ready for Christmas. According to local law enforcement, many of those folks were armed. They were repeating some of the president's false allegations of widespread fraud in an intimidating way. And after speaking out defending the integrity of the 2020 election, it's my understanding that you and your family also faced threats. In fact, it required us to take some and make some arrangements for your security to be here today to testify in person. On December 1st of this year, a top Republican election official, Gabrielle Sterling, in the Georgia Secretary of State's office, held a news conference urging President Trump and Republican lawmakers to stop attacking Georgia's election system with baseless claims of voter fraud. And in that news conference, Mr. Sterling said President Trump was, and I'm quoting Mr. Sterling here, quote, inspiring people to commit potential acts of violence, end of quote, and that, new quote, someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to get shot, someone's going to get killed, end of quote. Now, we saw a similar dangerous trend earlier this year when election officials questioned COVID public health safety protocols and also fueled extremists, including in my home state, extremists that targeted the governor of the state of Michigan. So my question for you, Mr. Krebs, particularly given the fact that you've faced some of this, do you believe Mr. Sterling's statements are overstated, or that unfortunately that real-world violence stemming from dangerous claims can indeed be a realistic concern that we should be conscious of?
Absolutely. He himself received a number of threats, and he has continued to receive threats, as I understand it. Secretary Raffensperger down there has. I've continued to receive threats. You know, and I think, and it's not just the heads of, you know, the principal level people, the directors of the offices. He was having IT contractors that were receiving death threats. We're seeing stoking of fires that is completely unnecessary with claims that are, you know, I'm not even talking about some of the court cases. I'm talking about in my case and in many of our cases is these fanciful claims of dead dictators and computer algorithms, and we're debunking them because they're nonsense, and we've said that from the beginning. But they've taken root, and you know, some people just don't want to hear how these systems actually work and what's actually capable across these systems, and most importantly, those I'm gonna say it again. The paper ballots. It's those the root of trust in the process that can dispense with these claims, even if these algorithms were there. They didn't work, but they're probably not there. So we've got to move past this. In these cases of threats, they need to be prosecuted. People need to, you know, be held accountable for these the claims they're making.
Yeah, and just the last question, and we've spoke about this earlier, that if you look at the fact that we were able to conduct this election in a fair way during the middle of a pandemic, which is an extraordinary time to try to conduct fair elections and do it as efficiently as possible, and the fact that you have thousands of election officials and volunteers that are working. I think of the men and women who went to the polling places to process voting, did it with concerns about their health, people who went to vote or for their health, or folks who chose to vote absentee in order to minimize the risk to their families, to the health of their families. This is really, in my mind, a time to celebrate a very successful election that was done fairly, and it was done in the midst of an extraordinary time that we're living in, and it's the result of folks in CISA, your folks, others with Homeland Security, folks with the FBI and others. Would you just comment on that as to how we should look at what we just went through? And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at ways to improve the system, to make sure that we minimize clerical errors, to make sure that if there are isolated incidents of fraud that they're dealt with and they're caught. But we should be also celebrating what just was pulled off in this country, which is an example of how a democratic system can work efficiently, fairly, and even do it under extraordinary pressure.
I absolutely agree with the earlier conversation about the need for a national conversation about how to improve trust in the elections. I think, things I've even recommended about eliminating the DREs and having more audits available after the election. And that's going to require, again, that policy conversation. It's going to require investing in democracy. But we do need to recognize the fact that this was a historic election. We had 100 million voters by November 3rd. That shows that people wanted to get out there and vote. They wanted to participate in this process. And all along, we have hundreds of thousands of election workers out there that, as you've pointed out, as I said in my opening statement, that risked their lives in a global pandemic to make sure that we could all get out there and vote. So we need to support them. I have significant concerns that the targeted violence against these election workers is going to have a chilling effect on turnout of election workers in the future. If there's no election workers, it's really hard to do an election. So we need to think about that and how to counter that going forward.
Thank you.